Tim, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast today, man. It's great to have you. For our watchers and listeners, could you give us a brief introduction about you?
Yeah, man. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, my name's Tim Brokopp. I'm founder and executive director of Amoveo Group, which is a nonprofit development organization that works all over the world. So about that's about it.
Okay, fair enough, man. Awesome. For this episode, it's pretty straightforward from the title, but we're talking about strategy of youth mission trips. What it takes to have a proper strategy when thinking about a mission trip and what it means to have one. For decades now, there have been many places to go, many reasons to take students on a mission trip. But that also means that we have decades of experiences and now some data to show that a large amount of groups, even if what they do in the trip is necessary and good, their strategy and how they approach it, or even their planning for it, might be in haste and not the best perspective to have. So, Tim, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with mission trips and then what led you to start Amoveo?
Yeah, sure. Well, I grew up a missionary kid in West Africa, a country called Gabon,
Okay.
and so I experienced receiving mission trips as a kid. My parents would have, supporting churches come over, help build churches, things like that. And then as I grew into adulthood and I actually served overseas and ran a volunteer missions post in the country I grew up in Gabon, and so was also heavily involved in the mission trip sort of hosting. Had a big intern program, and then we had short-term trips come over.
Okay.
So have kind of seen it all, and there's always there's good situations and bad situations. Um, but so that's kind of been my experience. I was also a youth pastor for a bit, so I took my youth groups on trips, international trips, domestic trips, things like that. So felt like I've sort of experienced it all when it comes to what those are. When we
Yeah.
started Amaveo 9 years ago, one of the things that we wanted was to be a development org. We weren't designed to be a short-term missions trip organization. That wasn't our focus. That wasn't our desire. However, we did understand that they play an intricate role in developing a donor base, developing what we would call, world citizens, people that understand that there's a whole lot more to life than just, the zip code that they live in.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit of the background of my experience with missions trips, Alaveo, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Wow. Yeah. I haven't talked to too many people who had that experience of mission trips coming to them as a kid and growing up in Africa. Yeah, man, I can only imagine what that was like. That gives you a pretty unique perspective, especially now on this side of missions of organizing them,
Yeah.
because we can look at data, kind of like we mentioned earlier, and even experiences of going on one, but the experiences at the beginning of your life of receiving them is pretty unique. I think that gives you a really cool perspective. Have you met many people like yourself who are involved in missions who received them when they were kids?
Um, well, I mean, you know, 20, that was what, 30 years ago now.
Okay.
And so that was way before short-term mission trips were sort of like really popular. So,
Hmm.
my parents were a little bit on the front front end of that.
Hmm.
And I remember, the other missionaries on the field rarely ever would have any teams come out, but my parents would do it regularly. So, to answer that question, not a ton. There's other missionary kids that I've talked to that had some experience with that, but my parents were a little bit, I don't know, pioneering in that
Yeah.
regard. So, yeah, it was a great experience. But we were in the bush, so we had teams come. We got Skippy peanut butter, we got Oreo cookies, Doritos, things that we would never have a chance at. Which is Probably not the most important reason for a trip, but as a
Yeah.
kid, it was. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Very cool, man. Very
yeah,
cool. Yeah, I had been to Africa once on a trip. So in 2018, we took students to Spain in man, the name of the city is escaping me, but it's right there across the port from Morocco.
yeah.
And
Gibraltar.
yeah. So
Yeah,
we went over there for one day because the place in Spain where we took our students was a media center that created YouTube videos, devotionals, Bibles in Moroccan Arabic, and they would send it over there to the
yeah,
underground church. And we took our students over there to experience here's where they're sending it. And the girls
yeah,
had to dress a certain way, and they weren't able to make eye contact with other guys, and all this
yeah.
kind of stuff that people just don't think about until they go. And when I was a youth pastor, I would love to take my students on an international trip at least once during high school so they could really experience that for themselves. But my bush experience was in South America. So we were in northeast Peru,
Oh wow.
backing right up to Brazil, and everything like that. And the kids who would walk to the kind of the kids center where we put on an Awana program for them, and they got a shower and some meal. Some of them would walk about half an hour from where they lived. And
Wow.
one time we followed them home to give their families some bags of food and some resources, and got to talk with them. And I remember seeing just a wall of trees ahead. And some kids will walk out of there, and it's just like, man, you just don't
Yeah.
know until you're there, really unique experiences.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, international travel for an American, over the last 15 years has just exploded. But what's unique about a mission trip is that you get off the beaten path, right?
Hmm.
You're not in some sort of touristic sort of place, and you actually get to experience culture and people. And like you said, you walk home, and then all of a sudden you walk into this rainforest, and it's nothing like you've ever experienced in your life before, right?
Yeah.
And and it's cool. I mean, it's there's all kinds of research of what it does to the brain, when it comes to growing it and the health with that and experiencing new things. um, I just think it's there's nothing else like it. So
Yeah.
pretty cool.
Absolutely. So there are two primary components, I think. There's probably a lot, but for our conversation at least, there are two primary components I want to hone in on for discussion. And they're both why questions. And I think
Mm,
there's a lot more why questions in ministry. We tend to focus on the how, but the why questions are kind of the more important places to start. And I think they're going to be for us, like if we were a youth worker who's listening or watching, taking students, it's why are we doing a mission trip in the first place? And why are we doing this particular mission trip that we've chosen?
yeah.
Tim, which question do you want to start with? Why are we doing a mission trip to begin with, or why are we doing this mission trip?
I think, why are we doing a mission trips? Probably a better place to start, because the other one is probably involved in a little bit more of the maybe the vision or the outreach strategy of what your local faith community is trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we chatted about this, I think, in our first phone call about When Helping Hurts. And
Yes,
when that
yes.
book came out, and that study series, amazing book by the Chalmers Institute there, they did a great job on it. I took a little bit of exception to their chapter on short-term mission trip, because I felt, one of the benefits of growing up in the jungles of Africa is your worldview is completely different than necessarily if you grew up in the West or the
Mm-hmm.
U.S., right?
Mm-hmm.
So that book was written, again, everything was perfect from the standpoint of understanding, how to do the most good,
Right.
basically, the idea behind it. But that chapter was written very much from a Western worldview. And it was this idea that, we're trying to get the most bang for our buck, right? And
Yes.
missions trips aren't the most bang for your buck when it comes to development or outreach, things like that, which is absolutely true. I mean, we run a development org, and yeah, it's to the projects that we do all over the world cost a lot of money.
Mm.
And yeah, could you redirect those funds that you're going to take in that trip to those projects? Absolutely. But what is missed is that the experience, right, of the person that gets on the ground and experiences another culture, experiences, another worldview, another faith perspective, like maybe your team did there in Mexico, in Morocco,
Mm-hmm.
um, is is something that is really, I think, important to the broader kingdom of God, and the way that it interacts. When you take high schoolers in the U.S. and they go and hang out with high schoolers, say in Kenya or Mexico or Haiti, one of the things that they'll realize is that they have a lot less than they do, right? But they're more, they're happier than they are, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, you can't teach experience, right? We can have all the Bible studies in the world that will talk about how God is, this rock, and how it can provide this joy and things like that. But when they get on the ground and they're hanging out with other teenagers and they see that, they have, a tenth of what they have, but they've experienced the joy of the Lord, all those things that it really is, yeah, it'll change your lives. And so, getting away from this idea that expediency is the number one thing that we need to be focusing on when it
Mm.
comes to this stuff, and instead of experience, I think is a mistake.
Yeah.
So when you say, why do we go on mission trip? I always say for experience, because it's
Mm-hmm.
our best teacher, right?
Ooh,
So
yeah. Yeah, I
yeah,
love that. I love that. I think that's a great point to bring up, because I did really enjoy that series because we went through it as a church, and with the students especially, we got to look at our own short-term mission trips, why we do them, and we were already doing them with the sense of, hey, we're joining an organization that's here long term for the community and plugged in and doing things, which was great.
yeah,
But I too was a little like sensitive to, hey, short-term mission trips aren't like evil or terrible. Like, there are good reasons to have them, yes, for crisis, yes, for other things, but with that perspective in mind. And yeah, I think going back to the peanut butter and Oreos, I think especially for younger students who might go on a trip, they might be looking for that, I get to take a picture of this or see that, which that's going to be there. That's even there for adults. But
yeah,
when you get there and you realize, okay, yeah, this place is cool and this experience is great, but the experiences of the people that I'm meeting is really impacting my own. And that's why I love talking about apologetics or faith-based stuff from the idea of narrative or story, because our
yeah,
stories interact with one another and can affect each other's stories. Even if it's just a passing by, you don't know what your presence even will contribute to the stories of the people there. And something that I learned at the church I was working at in seminary, that I took with me to my last church where I was the youth pastor, was the idea of, for the youth group, mission trips were a next step of building the community that we have here. And so if you were a brand new student and you came in April and you wanted to go on the summer mission trip, I would say, hey, that's great. You should plug into what we're doing here in the summer and during the school year and get connected and apply for the mission trip, because every fall students would apply to go on a mission trip and they
hmm,
would fill out a questionnaire, talk about what they like about the youth group and how they're growing in their faith, why they want to go on a mission trip. And I would sit with them with an interview with them and at least one of, if not both of their parents, and be able to have their parents say, here's what I see in Jimmy or Annie and how God has gifted them and how they could benefit others on a mission trip. And to make sure that they were plugged in. So when they would go to serve, they were already
yeah,
a cohesive unit that kind of could experience that together. And I heard from multiple people whenever we would go different places, especially if it was a place that had one group in and one group out, one group in the next week, they would say, your students seem to already kind of be in the same mindset and
yeah,
here to serve. And that was a huge compliment, but it was just a testimony to kind of what you're talking about with experience, and how the experiences you have, whether it's in the Western world, whether it's in Africa or wherever else, if you go somewhere else, what your expectations are versus what you're going to experience, especially with the experiences of people you're meeting, that's always going to be a really fun, intricate web that is going to have a resounding impact. And if you're serious about committing to whatever that trip is, that's where I think the kingdom work really starts
Yeah.
building.
Well, I mean, I'd get the question all the time about whether, hey, do you think what's the age of someone that can come on a trip? How do you decide that stuff? And I'd always point them towards the fruit of the spirit and just say,
Mm,
listen, like, how do you see that the fruit of the spirit working in that kid's life? I don't care if they're in seventh grade or they're in 12th grade, you know. And then the other part was that to your, what you guys did, the mission trips, the impact of that mission trip is based 100% on how much prep time goes into the pre-trip and then also the post-trip stuff.
yeah.
So we're in the process of finalizing curriculum's a weird word, but really some curriculum that would be designed for the youth teams that are coming to experience what we're doing around the world, both on the front and the back end. I mean, there's good stuff out there already, so it wasn't something that was a priority for us, but it still is something that is just super important. And when you talk about that second question, right? Why are we going here?
Yeah.
I think that, even thinking about, what your local faith community is doing locally, we talk about, getting proximate with things, and there's
Hmm.
this idea that, listen, you need to get near stuff to understand it, experience it, and feel it. But how you understand it, experience, and feel it really is something that you have to learn to do well and healthy. And you can do that, 10 minutes from your home, literally.
Yes. Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and I always would encourage people to make sure that you're doing some, that local thing is happening too, right?
Mm.
Because otherwise, it is a little bit of a splash and dash type thing, and I just don't think it it serves everyone involved if that's the case. So,
Hmm.
I don't know if you want to move on to that next question
Yeah,
or
for
not.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
But
why this mission trip? So why does someone choose a specific one? What's the consideration that needs to go into that?
yeah, I think that one of the things that we have been very intentional about with our trips and when we work with volunteers is that we actually are creative about how we use them. I don't have any desire to have a youth group come in and paint the same wall 4 times, over the course of a summer. And
Right.
the thing is it, because of our background and experience, we've worked really hard at making sure that when people come in and they're volunteering and they're engaging with our projects and our ministry partners on the ground, that they're doing things that are forwarding what we're trying to do there. And whether it's relational connection, whether it's painting a wall, or whether it's doing a little uh, VBS style thing for a migrant community that's working at one of the farms that that we work at in Mexico. Just being intentional about that, I think, is super important. So when you ask about why this mission trip, I think it's something that as a leader, as the person who's putting it on, you really should. I mean, those should be questions you're asking, like who you're going to go work with, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and if you I want to be careful here, but if you get the response of like, because we want for you to have a really good time and for your group to grow in their spiritual maturity, I would just push back and say that that can happen. It's not the only thing that should be happening.
Right.
Um, and so when you're thinking about why this trip, especially with our Amoveo trips that we put on around the world. I mean, when we hire staff and we put them in our locations, there's a whole sort of, the whole conversation around, hey, listen, you're going to have to host teams and interns. And it needs to be very intentional about how we do that. And so, those are just hard questions that you have to ask at the front end. Um, sometimes local faith communities are really on, they have a strategy for what they want to focus on, where they want to focus on. And I always say it's good to have that stream run throughout the whole, church. It doesn't just have to be the adults doing it or the men's group or the women's group or the youth group. It really should be something that you're doing collectively.
Hmm.
So there's a shared experience in that, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, I think that last piece you touched on, the intergenerational thing, adds a new layer of experience, especially when like the last few international trips I did. Um, well, the last one we did was we took several parents of the students there, and they got to break off and do some stuff just with themselves, and then with this with their students, and then other things. And it was really neat to see families be able to reflect on,
yeah,
hey, this makes us think back to when we went and did this at Thanksgiving locally. When we did this together as a family in Spain, it made us realize the next level of what we can do together and what's available for so many to do out there. And I also think kind of what you're speaking to of yeah, if it's just a fun experience and you can grow spiritually, I think many times, probably because of just the length of time the average youth pastor is at a church, or just because they're just looking for something to fill and do, the strategy holistically of like prep for it, go on it post trip, and it's part of like why as a church and a youth group why we're doing what we're doing. That kind of holistic strategy, I feel like for the most part isn't there in a lot of
yeah,
churches. It's just kind of plug and play, good stuff that's beneficial, but that's all I can keep up with because I'm too busy, or I'm not here long enough to think of a 4 or 5 year strategy, you know. And so I think those also play into what can hinder the healthy perspective of choosing a specific trip or not.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and that's a big role that we feel that we can play in helping a local faith community when it comes to sort of identifying strategy and how does that filter down through the intergenerational ministries. I mean, we're involved in those conversations all the time with church boards, lead pastors, youth pastors, children's pastors. Because one of the other things that we're intentional about is also connecting them beyond just the trip, right? There's no
Mhm.
reason why they can't stay in touch with the Indigenous ministry partner that they've been connecting with and what that
Yeah.
looks like. And, with the modern day technology of Zoom and things like that, I mean, it's really easy
Mhm.
for that stuff to happen. So, yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Um, I think it's a big endeavor for for faith communities to do that, but I think the impact's much greater if they can and bring some focus to that. So yeah,
Yeah.
good
Totally
word.
agree. Totally agree. Well, Tim, this has been great, man. Love to get
Yeah,
to talk with you. Tell people who are watching and listening how they can connect with you and how they can get plugged in with Amoveo and see maybe how they can get their youth group connected with y'all.
yeah, sure. So I mean, when we picked the name Amoveo, we thought it was clever, but everyone asked us like, what in the world does that mean? So Amoveo basically is Latin for shift or move. Um, and so in what we wanted to do is for development as a development org really move into some long-term sustainability from when it came to local projects. So
Mhm.
best place to do that is amoveogroup.org. That's AMOVEO group GROUP.org.
Awesome.
So that's the ease. It's got all of our projects, got our contact information on it. Obviously, we have a Facebook page and Instagram account too. So AMOVEO group GROUP.org is the best way to
Okay.
get hold of us. So
Awesome. I
cool.
will make sure and put that in the show notes so
Yep.
people can find
Perfect.
that. And yeah, man, Tim, thanks again for for being on here. And hopefully we can reconnect at some point. And yeah, I love seeing what people are doing around the country, but around the world for the gospel. So thanks for all you do for missions and thanks for your time.
Thank you, man. It's my pleasure. Take care.
Well, that does it for today's podcast episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to this YouTube channel so you can have a heads up about when we have new content. Also, if you ever listen to podcasts in the car or somewhere else, please follow us on your podcast player of choice. We are on every single one of them. If you haven't already, please check out our website, youthministrymaverick.com. There you can see a comprehensive list of our guests, their bio information, a list of ministries that can help you in your own ministry, some articles I've written, and a store where you can get some podcast merchandise. Also, we have a big ask. If you would go and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, not just a rating, but a review, take a screenshot of it and send it to me on social media. And in return, I will write you a thank you card and send you some podcast merchandise that you can't buy on the store. Well, that does it. We'll catch you next time. Adios.